And begin. One, two, three. One up, beep, ba, boop, ba, dee. Dee, 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 do, 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 do. Ba, da, ba, 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 ba. It's Wednesday. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, picks of the week. Do. Oh, I am going to be sore in the AM. Leave my personal life out of this. Had to. I was working at the shop today and I had to shift, which is one of the most tedious chores that you can do at a comic shop. And that's saying a bit because there's quite a few. I don't find them tedious a lot of the time, but there it is a lot of just alphabetizing and taping bags and pricing books. I mean, it's a lot of routine, but when I have so we only have so much space for back issues, right? And I'm adding like three short boxes worth or four. So I have to move, and you have to keep everything in order as you shift it because you have to make room for the new additions. And so from A to S today, I had to shift everything, and I can feel my muscles are sore. I don't exercise for Christ's sake, so not as young as I used to be is what I'm finding out. First up this week, Aerosmith #1. Not a huge fan of the band, if I'm being 100% honest. They have Run DMC to thank for any kind of career, if you ask me. I know that they were a thing in the 60s into the 70s somewhat, but that had cooled entirely by 1986 when Run DMC gave them a huge boost, and then they were a huge in the 90s again when they were terrible, quite frankly. And then that guy got to be on American Idol for 50 years or whatever. Charmed life. They only just arrested the murderers of Jam Master Jay. I digress. Aerosmith. By Kurt Busiek and Carlo Pacheco. This was a book on Wildstorm back in the early 2000s, even possibly the late 90s. I have the first issue, which I read probably like '05, '06, somewhere in there when I was getting heavy into Busiek. Maybe even a little bit earlier. Because I think I started getting pretty heavy into Busiek like in '02, '03. Um, this is a World War One era story, but there are dragons and magic and things like that, and they haven't done it for a long time. I don't know why they decided to bring it back. I feel and Busiek's bringing Astro City back, which I'm excited about too. Kurt Busiek is a tremendous superhero writer. One of the later he came from fandom, like a lot of people do. But like if you read comics from the '70s and '80s, and you read the letters pages, you'll find letters from Kurt Busiek. That's the kind of writer he is. The guy who was like very invested in all this stuff from childhood, and wrote. He broke in the late '90s. Not a great period, but he wrote the Avengers, and then after Heroes Return, where the Avengers were all dead, he started Thunderbolts, and that's one of my favorites. His Avengers run is really good. I haven't read all of it, but he's good. He's a really good superhero writer, and but he's also been plagued with health problems his whole career. I don't know if this is a lifetime thing, but so after he kind of more or less quit writing for Marvel, he does. I think. I mean, I just bought. He just did a Namor miniseries last year, or the year before during King and Black. But after he left Thunderbolts, I think he started doing Astro City at Image, and Astro City is really just him doing Marvel and DC stories with his own versions of those characters. And there's more to it than that, but that is largely what it is. He wanted to keep doing superhero stuff, but he wanted to do it with his own creative control over it. And Brant Anderson does all the art, and it's really good stuff. It's very I don't want to say meta, but it's one of those. It's there's a lot of those, and I'm sure I've mentioned this a million times, so I don't know why I'm going into it now. But even Astro City was very spotty. Like it would come out for a while, and then it would stop for a long time, and then it would start again, and then it would stop for a while. And even the last time they did Astro City was almost 10 years ago, and I got bored with it after a while. But now I'm getting excited for it again, and they're issuing a new edition, like a new collection of Astro City, all the early stuff. A lot of it either don't have or haven't read in a long time. So that's all to say that I'm going to read this comic book this week. I don't know. I totally got sidetracked there. What are the odds? Also this week is She-Hulk #1. This is, I want to say, Volume 5 of She-Hulk. I could be mistaken. I looked at the list earlier, but I know it's probably closer to 7 or 8. She-Hulk is a very fun character, though. I mean, from at the beginning in the '70s when they created her purely as a licensing move, like they did a lot of female versions of popular characters because they didn't want somebody else beating them to it, or creating another She-Hulk for like a movie or something. So that was, in She-Hulk's case, that was exactly what she was. And at first, she was thing the deal the deal with She-Hulk is that she is Bruce Banner's cousin, Jennifer. Cannot pull her last name. I'm tired. Um, Walters. Jennifer Walters is Bruce Banner's cousin. She fell ill. She's a successful lawyer. She fell ill with a mysterious disease, and or no, she has a very rare blood type. The only person who matched her blood type was Bruce Banner, and so he gave her, a transfusion, and it turned her into the She-Hulk. And she was, at first, she was just a clone of the Incredible Hulk, where she was angry and her Hulk smash and stuff. But she very quickly became, I think it was John Byrne. I don't know, it wasn't that quick, I guess. Well, she quickly became just like a sassy city gal, but she's 6'7" and she's green and she's ripped. She was on the Fantastic Four for a while in the '80s. That was pretty. That was actually Byrne actually who put her on the Fantastic Four, and then my first exposure to She-Hulk was the John Byrne series of the late '80s, where it was very um, meta. It was very breaking the fourth wall. She would talk directly to the reader. The cover of #1 is a very famous cover of her holding a copy of the comic that she's appearing on and saying, "If you don't buy my new comic, I'm going to come to your house and rip up all your X-Men," because they were the biggest comic back then. So there was a lot of, but it was fun. It was really weird and silly, and really set the template for what Deadpool would eventually kind of become. And then that series went for a pretty good long while, and then ever since then, like, she'll get series. I think the only series I haven't read since then was Dan Slott's, which only I just happened to miss it, and I keep meaning to go back and read it, but because I really liked his stuff back then. And then Mariko Tamaki wrote She-Hulk for a minute, and I really liked that. There's been a few attempts at bringing the book back, and they're always good, but they just never seem to last very long. So who knows with this one? This is written by Rainbow Rowell, who was recently she was the last writer on Runaways, which, and for my money, one of the best runs on that book. And I've read every issue of the Runaways, and there's only, like, I've done this babbling before, but there's only been like 4 or 5 writers of Runaways, and she's one of the best. My boss was not, like, he's a big She-Hulk guy, so he was looking forward to this, but he didn't say, he said he didn't like Rainbow Rowell, and I was like, all right. I mean, I have not read anything aside from Runaways, but Runaways was really, 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 really good. And then he read it this week, and he said it was really good. So just listen to me. You got nothing to worry about. And then finally, X Lives of Wolverine #1. I know, it's the Wolverine thing. I don't have it to show you, but I just read this book called Slugfest, and it was a book about the rivalry between Marvel and DC. And it ended up being, the first, few chapters, I was like, I know all this stuff. But by the end of the book, there was a lot I was like, oh, I hadn't read that before, or I had forgotten about it. But one of the points that was kind of hammered on is how events weren't a thing before the mid '80s, and now, and even after, like, the 90s bubble broke, by the early 2000s, the event had become like entrenched again as an annual thing, and I love it. I feel it's one of the things about superhero comics that was always there for me because I didn't start collecting until '88 when they've been around for a few years. So to me, it was just like, yeah, of course. I didn't know, I was only 11. Um, and now, yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. Sometimes there's, this is a $6 book, and it's gonna be. I don't think every issue is gonna be $6. I hope not. They're gonna do this series, and every other week they're gonna do the X Deaths of Wolverine. So it's like a two mini series that run together, and I don't care. It's about Wolverine. That was the thing, though. Is like reading the solicits at work and stuff. We were like, I couldn't tell you what happens. I think it's a time travel thing. I think Logan has to go back and visit a bunch of eras from his past. So it's really just an excuse to put him in all his old costumes. This is obviously very similar to the Russell Dodderman covers that he's been doing, but this is by Adam Kubert, who's a longtime X-Men artist. So I don't know what it's about. It's written by Benjamin Percy, who's been writing X-Force and Wolverine for the last couple years. And my boss was again asking me about him and what I thought. And for the most part, I like him. But I say this, and I say this with all due respect, I'd like to see somebody else take a stab at Wolverine. And like Benjamin Percy's been writing it for 2 years, and he was the first one to have a crack at it after 5 years that there was no regular Wolverine title. So I'm ready for somebody else because I have very high expectations for Wolverine, not just because he's my favorite character. In fact, the fact that he's my favorite character doesn't really enter into this. I just think, objectively speaking, well, obviously you have to be a fan, I guess, but when they started the Wolverine series over, Wolverine Volume 3 in 2002, it was written by Greg Rucka, and it's still some of the best stuff I've ever read. And then that began a years long run where it was just super good writer after super good writer, and I could only pull a few off my head, but you had Rucka in there for a long time, Mark Millar for a good chunk. He wrote all the Old Man Logan stuff that has since become its own sort of franchise within the Marvel universe. Um, and he wrote Enemy of the State, which was really fun. Um, who wrote Civil War? Who was writing it? That I don't remember now. Everybody, I just remember that there was for about 10 years. Just Wolverine was such a solid book. Like I was never disappointed. A lot of the Wolverine one shots, which I don't think they do as much of those anymore, but they used to do a lot of Wolverine one shots and miniseries, and those would be you were buyer beware with some of those. I would buy most of them because I was a completist, but a lot of them were just like forgettable. They don't do as much of that now that I thinking about it, but they still do a lot of event books, and it's that thing where if everything's an event, then nothing's an event. But I still think it's fun. Oh, anyway, I was saying. So there was a good long 10-year run on Wolverine, and then Paul Cornell took over. I want to say in like 2013, and I just don't like. I didn't like any of his stuff. All due respect, just wasn't good. But at that point, it was like, well, I mean, the books had such an incredible run for this long. And plus, I knew they were going to be killing him in the next year, so I was like, I'll stick it out. But if it was any other book, I would have dropped it. Um, and so, like I say, so Percy's been writing it for about 2 years now. That's another thing that I've noticed is when they do things like this, and they have done a lot of like mini events for the X books lately. The pattern I'm sort of seeing is that they give Teenie Howard, they give her X Factor. Yes. Um, she does that for about 10 issues, I want to say, maybe more, and then or Evita Ayala, one of the two. I'm pretty sure it's Howard. Then they cancel it because it's not selling as well as the rest of the X books, I guess. But they go here, do Trial Magneto. That'll be kind of your final bow. Not all of them. I mean, Hellions didn't get that, but Marauders got like a. Well, I'll talk about that in a minute. right? Wasn't that one of the, yeah? So I'll get to that, but so I'm hoping in a little bit of a way this might be Percy's kind of last thing before they move on. Because like I'll get to Marauders here and picks up last week, but that was picks up. So as I was saying, Marauders. I think I said last week that this was the final issue and that was it, but it's not. It's the final issue of Jerry Duggan's run, and then they're gonna just start Marauders over at number 1. Now look, I am very brand loyal to Marvel Comics, but god damn it, I am so sick of this. This is one of these things too that I would make fun of other people for or roll my eyes at people for complaining about, but it's starting to get to me too. And again, this Slugfest book that I read this week kind of brings up the same point. When I started collecting comics, the Fantastic Four was in the 300s, the Uncanny X-Men were in the mid 200s, and it was like, oh wow, you just have to kind of jump in where you can jump in. And then the 90s happened, and for more reasons than I care to get into right now, the trend became to just have everything start over all the time. So, not just cancel it and let it sit idle for a few years like She-Hulk, but like the next issue of the Marauders is coming out like in March. And I know there's going to be a new creative team, but I don't know off the top of my head because it's like a new team. So that was I don't want to go through it again. Because it was fine, but also as soon as I realized that there was going to be another issue of the Marauders, I was like, well then why don't you just make that number 28? That's what they used to do. They would keep the numbering, but they go new creative team, jumping on point. Now they have to put number 1 on. I think it's because they think psychologically people are more likely to okay, I'll buy that, and I think it's true, but it's also just kind of annoying. It makes a mess of my list, my catalog of all my collection, and it makes it a pain in the ass to file these things at the shop. I mean, the retailer is the last person anybody cares about. I'm barely a retailer. I'm a retailer's assistant, if anything. I digress again. So yeah, this is good, and we'll see you back for the next issue. This was also very fun. Daredevil Woman out here, and this I do want to remember what's happening now because this ties directly into the Devil's Reign events, obviously. So let's see. This issue's kind of horny, everybody. She flashes back. All right, so Elektra runs into an old college friend. She also runs into the woman who recruited her into the Hand back in the 80s, who I don't think has been a character that's appeared in comics before. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure where this is going. Oh, right. And then, okay, there's a big reveal at the end that I don't want to reveal. Little uneven, I guess, now that I'm thinking about it. There's a lot of past stuff and then, a lot of flashbacks and then to present day. Those obviously tie in, but then the reveal at the end, you're like, oh, okay. Yeah, I'm fine with that, but where the hell did that come from? See, yeah, this is another. I feel like Starsky's wrapping up his his run at Daredevil, and then this is big finale is all this Devil's Reign stuff. And then also this week, I read a ton this week, but I also read this. This is the Goon, a bunch of crap, Anonymous Volume 1 by Eric Powell. The Eric Powell I've been a fan of for a while, but his biggest creation, the Goon, is the one I'm least familiar with. Now I can't remember. I want because him and Kyle Hotz I get confused with them in my head sometimes. Kyle Hotz did a book called Billy the Kid's Old Timey Carnival, and I'm pretty sure he wrote it and drew it. But I feel like Eric Powell was involved somewhere. I have a few issues of the Goon here and there, largely because they would be like Patton Oswalt wrote a few issues and like other comedians that I liked have written the Goon. But the Goon is basically this big dumb idiot and his pal Frankie, and they beat up zombies. That's about it. That's the long and the short of it. It's a lot of stupid fun. Eric Powell has got a very country fried sense of humor. He's from Tennessee, and it's a lot of weird. It's a lot of goofy shit. You know, a lot of, like everybody dresses kind of old timey, and there's squids all the time for some reason. And yeah, zombies and stuff like that. I'm trying to think of like, because I know I've read a bunch of. Oh, he has a book called Hillbilly, which I don't think I've read. He has one called Satan's Ass Baby, which I have read, and I read that to my class when I taught nursery school. They loved it. They couldn't get enough of it. But yeah, it was fun. There's at least a couple more of these, and I do intend on getting them eventually. But I mean, they are sizable. $30 for this is that's not bad at all, really. But I don't need. I mean, I'm really starting to feel the pinch, just as far as how much I have to read. And I still have this whole closet to get to. So like, you know, I'm reading a lot, but I'm not. It doesn't feel like I'm getting any. I'm looking at my to read pile. Oh, I read. Oh, gosh, I forgot about that. Hold on one second. I'm gonna try and pause this. And we're back. I know I get so excited after I finish this, I just put it on the shelf. I also finally finished Judge Dredd, the complete Brian Boland. Brian Boland. I don't remember if I even talked about this. I've had this book since 2013, and I only just finished it. Back, no, I guess that would have been 13 or 14. I think it was no, I think it was 2014. Yeah, back in those days, I was flirting with the publisher IDW, who were based in San Diego. I think still are, but I'm not sure. Um, because my friend Sarah Gatos used to work there, and I was looking for a job, and so she was like, "You should volunteer to work the booth at Comic Con," and I also did so at WonderCon that same year in Anaheim, and it was a volunteer gig, so I didn't get paid, but I got to network with some of the muckety mucks, and it was usually just one day each. It was like 2 days total, and they would let me walk out with a whole armload of stuff. So this is one of the things that I got. This is a collection of a bunch of all of Brian Bolland. Brian Bolland is a very well regarded British artist, and Judge Dredd is where he cut his eye teeth. Um, I knew Brian Bolland. The first thing I read by him was The Killing Joke, which is still one of the best Batman stories ever told. Certainly the best Joker story ever told. And but he doesn't do a lot of he did a book called Camelot 3000 in the mid 80s, which isn't very good. It's like a futuristic Arthurian, King Arthur legend, and very mid 80s, very hair metal. Not hair metal. Hair metal is what I think of as like Slaughter and Poison and bands like that, but very D&D metal. The kind of metal bands that would their albums would be like concept albums, and they tell a story about elves and a wizard and dragons. That's what Camelot 3000 was, the comic book version of that. But in the late 70s, early 80s, he drew Judge Dredd, and he's an incredible artist. He's got a very clean line, is what I always think when I'm reading his stuff. No, that's not very. Oh, he did the original Judge Death stories, which are incredible. Some of the stuff I had read before, because I've been like a Judge Dredd fan, kind of in and out. Because I like Judge Dredd, but it really kind of is best in smaller doses, which is why it took me. I mean, I started reading this book about a year ago, but it's been sitting on my shelf since I got it for free from IDW. Oh, P.S. They did offer me a job, but then, the first time the main dude was like, at Comic Con, he was like, "Well, we should talk about getting you in here," and I was like, like that week had taken a job at the American Comedy Company. I don't regret it, but I also sometimes wonder what. But like from what I gathered, and this is not a slight against them, but from what I gathered working in the booth, it was a very like chaotic sort of work environment. Everybody kind of pitched in and did, nobody had like one thing. Everybody did like several things. It was really something to see like them coming, these people, and they all clearly, respected and liked each other, and they're all super into comics, which is very cool. Um, Too much for me. That would have been. I don't think I would have thrived in an environment like that. I might not be giving myself credit. But anyway, this is not the clean line I was talking about, but this is one of my favorite spreads. These are the four dark judges from a different dimension where the crime is life. Any crime is committed by the living, so the judges decided, well, we're just going to kill everybody. My favorite stuff. Anyway, I really like it. And then what I went and I can also recommend this. What? We've already been here a half hour. There was a movie made of Judge Dredd in 1995 starring Sylvester Stallone, and I've never seen it because it's starring Sylvester Stallone. It looked like a piece of shit, and from all reports back, and I could tell it was not going to be good. And this is going to sound goofy. Well, where do you draw a line at this point? In the previews, Judge Dredd, as played by Sylvester Stallone, doesn't have his helmet on half the time. He's just got his big dumb Sylvester Stallone face out there. The character never takes this helmet off, and so that was, I think, right away there. And it's such a stupid Hollywood thing, like, well, the people want to my voice, and like nobody's looking at your face, Sly. It was 1995. You're lucky to have a job at all. 2012, there was a different one. It's called Dredd, and it's available on Hulu. If you have that, I would highly recommend watching it. It was super fun. A lot of comparisons were made to I think it's from Thailand, or it might be from Taiwan. I'm always getting those two mixed up. A movie called The Raid, where a guy basically he gets trapped in an apartment, like a apartment block building with a bunch of bad guys, and has to fight his way to the top. It's really a video game. Dredd is very similar. That plot is very similar, but it didn't seem that similar to me. It bombed in the theater, I think, just because nobody gives a shit. But Carl Urban plays Judge Dredd, and he's perfect. He wears the helmet the whole time. He's he's from New Zealand, but 2000 AD is a British comic that Judge Dredd, first appeared and became popular in. And so kids living in the United Kingdom, like New Zealand, right? That's part of the United Kingdom. So Urban's a big fan of Dredd going back to when he was a kid, and he nails it. And there's like a lot. It was fun too because I had just read this, and there was a lot of like Bolin drew a lot of the major Judge Dredd stories, or he drew parts of it anyway. Because 2000 AD was a weekly book, so a lot of these stories aren't complete. It's just the Bolin parts of some of them. But there was a big story called the Judge Child Quest, and that's referenced in the movie, like very briefly. But I know what that is. The Angel Gang was another thing that Bolin. I think there's some. I don't remember exactly, but there's a lot. Like, and that was when I was watching the movie. I was immediately struck by how perfectly it got the gritty, dirty part of Judge Dredd, but the comic is really silly and goofy at the same time. It's hyper violent and really over the top. This movie was so violent that it was funny, but it wasn't like fun. Super good movie. I'm gonna shut up now. But